All right, ready to dive in. We're tackling the Old Testament today.
Oh, the big one.
Yeah, but don't worry, we've got a good roadmap with that Texto Colado episode you sent.
Smart choice. That series is great for context.
Seriously, it's like imagine walking into a massive library, thousands of years old, scrolls everywhere.
And you're looking for, what, the meaning of life? Instructions on how to build a temple?
Exactly, but Texto Colado, they're like, hold on, let's start with the Dewey Decimal System of the Bible.
Which is?
The structure. They break the Old Testament into 4 sections.
Like genres, right.
Exactly. You've got law, historical books, wisdom and poetry, and prophets. Makes it less daunting.
Way less. And it's crucial because it shows you the Old Testament isn't just one long story.
Right. Like, people think chronological, but it's more like a mixtape.
Love that analogy. You got your fiery speeches, your love poems, your history lessons, all mixed in.
So first up, the law. Those foundational rules, think 10 Commandments and such.
Setting the ground rules for a whole people.
Then historical books, which, let's be real, are more like epic sagas.
Totally. Wars, love affairs, political intrigue, you name it.
And then, wisdom and poetry, my personal favorite.
Gets you thinking, right? Philosophical, introspective, all about searching for wisdom.
Like peeking into the ancient Israelites' diary. And finally, the prophets.
Always a good time. Speaking truth to power, warning of consequences.
But also offering hope, right? This idea that even when things are bleak, a brighter future is possible.
Exactly. It's this amazing tapestry of human experience all tied together.
And speaking of human experience, let's talk about how it all began, Genesis, the creation story.
The original in the beginning. Always a good place to start.
It's incredible, right? God speaks the world into existence. But the part that gets me is humans made in God's image.
That's huge. It's like, what does it even mean? What does it tell us about ourselves?
And about our relationship with God. Huge implications.
Texacolado touches on that this idea isn't just theological. It's got real-world ethical weight.
Makes you look at humanity differently, for sure. But then, of course, comes the fall, that classic tale.
Adam and Eve, the forbidden fruit, messing things up for the rest of us.
Right. Though Texto Colado points out it's not just about breaking a rule, it's deeper.
It's that separation from God, that disruption of harmony that impacts everything that follows.
Like a shadow falls over everything.
And that's where we meet Abraham and this idea of a covenant, a promise that changes everything.
Talk about a leap of faith. God says, leave everything you know. Go to this land I'll show you.
And from you, a great nation will arise. Talk about high stakes.
Right. But this promise to Abraham, that's the seed for so much of what comes later.
The future nation of Israel, the line of kings, even hints at a coming Messiah.
It's like planting a tiny seed that grows into this massive tree.
And that tree, it's got some deep roots, but it's about to face some serious storms.
Because those descendants, destined for greatness, well, they end up slaves in Egypt.
Talk about a plot twist. But hey, that's the Old Testament for you, always keeping you on your toes.
So we've got Abraham's descendants, chosen people, stuck as slaves in Egypt. Talk about a rough start.
Right. It's like, hey, remember that promise about a great nation? Yeah, first you got to deal with this.
Centuries of forced labor. Yeah, not exactly glamorous. But this is where the drama really kicks in.
Cue the epic music. Because now it's time for Moses.
And let's be real, nobody rocks a staff in a burning bush encounter like Moses.
Texto Colado really captures how audacious this whole thing is.
God basically says, go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And Pharaoh's like,
who's this God guy again? Nah, I'm good.
So then, bam, plagues, the Nile turning to blood, frogs everywhere.
And finally, the Red Sea parting. You can't make this stuff up.
It's like watching a blockbuster movie, but with way higher stakes.
And Texto Colado gets it right. It's not just about escaping. This is nation-building time.
The birth of a people forged in the fires of, well, a lot of divine intervention.
Exactly. It's God saying, I keep my promises even if it takes some dramatic flair.
But then you'd think after all that, they'd be like, okay, God, whatever you say.
Nope, that's not how we humans roll, is it?
Seriously. They see the Red Sea part, then what? They're grumbling about food in the desert.
And that, my friend, is where the law comes in. Mount Sinai, 10 Commandments, the whole shebang.
God basically hands them a rule book for being a decent society.
Which, let's face it, they kind of needed at that point.
Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. Pretty solid advice in general.
But Texto Colado emphasizes it's not just about rules, it's about reflecting God's character.
Right, showing the world what it means to live in harmony with God and each other.
It's like a blueprint for a moral compass, even thousands of years later.
Seriously. But having the law and following it, two different things, right?
Oh yeah, this is where the promised land gets interesting. Enter the book of Joshua, things get a little messy.
Conquest, battles, moral gray areas. Texto Colado doesn't sugarcoat it.
It's like, yeah, God's with them, but establishing a nation in a land that's already inhabited? Complicated.
And even with divine backing, they still struggle. The Book of Judges, man, what a roller coaster.
Cycles of obedience, rebellion, deliverance, rinse and repeat.
Gideon, Samson, Deborah, these judges were a wild bunch.
Flawed heroes, for sure. But it shows that even with the best intentions, we're still human.
And through it all, God's still there, working with them, offering second chances.
Right. Like a parent patiently guiding their kid, even when they mess up. But then,
The Israelites get this idea. They look around at other nations and think, you know what we need? A king.
because clearly that always goes well.
So the Israelites want a king, huh? Figured that happened eventually.
Yeah, it's that whole grass is always greener thing, right? They see these other nations with kings and think, that's what we're missing.
Like having a king will solve all their problems. Spoiler alert.
It isn't. Texto Colado makes that clear, especially with their portrayal of Saul.
Oh yeah, Saul. Starts strong, ends. Well, less so.
They don't shy away from how power, even when it's tied to divine choice, can mess you up.
It's like you can almost see Saul getting lost in the role, the pressure, the expectations,
And that whole man after God's own heart thing doesn't come with a free pass on messing up.
which makes you wonder, what were they picturing? A king who'd never make a mistake.
Maybe. But that's the thing about the Old Testament. It's full of these complex characters.
And then comes David. Talk about a contrast.
Right. From shepherd to giant slayer to king. Talk about a resume.
But even David, he's got his flaws, right? Texo Colado doesn't shy away from that.
Nope. Affairs, bad decisions, the whole 9 yards.
But he's also described as a man after God's own heart. What's that even mean?
Honestly, that phrase could be a whole other deep dive. But I think it points to this deep love, this willingness to seek God, even when he messes up.
A very human kind of faith. And it's during David's reign that we get the Davidic covenant.
Huge moment. This promise that David's descendants will rule over Israel forever.
The dynasty. But not just any dynasty, right? Texto Colado highlights how this ties into messianic prophecy.
Exactly. It's pointing towards something bigger. A future king who will usher in true peace and justice.
It's like the whole story is building towards something, even thousands of years ago.
And that's what makes it so relevant. But let's not forget, things get messy again.
Oh yeah, the kingdom splits, there's corruption, things are kind of falling apart.
Cue the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. They do not hold back.
They're calling out injustice, warning of consequences. Not exactly the most popular guys, I'm guessing.
Nope. But Texacoatl points out they're not just doom and gloom.
Right, there's this thread of hope running through it all.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, even in exile, even when things are rough, God's still with you. And there's a brighter future coming.
It's a powerful message, even today. So we've gone from creation to kings, from exodus to exile.
We've seen epic battles, heard wisdom from poets, listened to prophets challenge the powerful.
And through it all, this one constant God's faithfulness. It's a pretty incredible story.
It really is. And even though it was written thousands of years ago, it still speaks to us today.
It reminds us that we're part of this bigger narrative, this ongoing story of faith, struggle, and ultimately hope. And I think that's a message we can all connect with no matter where we are in our own journeys.